about Dad and his car, and I met a couple of people who raced with him in period. It reminded me of how passionate, and that's where I got my passion, but how passionate he was about cars. And I don't know, I just resigned myself to the fact I'd never see it. And I had a Daimler Super V8, which was a marvellous car, and I sold it. And I had some money in the bank, and I thought, as we do, as classic car people, we sometimes open up online auction listings.
It has been known, hasn't it? Yeah, we passed the odd evening that way, I'm sure.
Absolutely, and I remember the date. It was August the 16th in 2018. I opened up eBay. It was one Sunday. I'd literally sold the last bit of memorabilia to a guy, and I dropped it off the day before and told him and his father the story. And his father had raced with my dad. And I told them the story, and they went, "You've got to find the car, you've got to track it down." I went, fate and destiny, it's not going to happen. The very next day, it is on eBay, and there are other classified listings available, but I was on eBay. and 4 pages down, I literally typed classic car in, 4 pages down, my heart skipped a beat, and I saw the front of this car. I thought, well, it had the old British number plate on it that it left the country with. And it was the same colour. I mean, literally, it'd only been out of the family at that point for just over 2 years. And it was on a timed auction. It had bids, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
And where was it? It was in the UK then.
It was back in. Sorry, yes, it was back in the UK, in Liverpool, where Dad had actually many years previously, probably 30 years previously, driven it up to Liverpool.
So whoever your stepmother sold the car to, they then shipped it back to the UK, or they sold it on to a dealer, I assume?
Yeah, so effectively, the chap that bought it, I tracked, because it's quite easy with chassis numbers and the small world of MGs, as many other cars, I tracked it down to America. The chap wanted too much money for it. He was enthusiastic, but also bought and sold them. So I just resigned myself. I sold the history file to him, the restoration file, all the old logbooks, and that was it, job done. And then, he batched it up with another twin cam, a left-hand drive twin cam, to a chap that basically imports cars into from America into Europe and sells them. So yes, he'd sold it, and that's why it came back to the UK. I just was flabbergasted when I saw it.
So what happened? You got straight on the phone, or
I emailed my stepmother quite quickly.
Raided your bank account?
Sold, hawked the family silver, part exchanged the car. Listen, I rang the dealer up, a really great guy, Peter. I remember meeting him and his wife, and I drove up to the Wirral where his dealership's based. And I thought, listen, I've got nothing to lose. I'll tell him the story, because he might say it's X number of £1,000 more because he saw that I'd pay the most or more for that car because of the emotional link. But actually, he was a great guy. He was very transparent. Showed me the reserve on the car, and he'd already had a couple of offers as I was driving from Birmingham to Liverpool.
Really?
And he said, "I've got the owner's this long-term owner's son is coming to look at it." I think. At that point, most of the people were like, "Right, okay, well, we'll wait for the outcome." So literally, I said,
he did the decent thing.
He definitely did, and I'd never driven it. So he said, "Come up and drive it," and that was a great thing for him to offer for me to do. So I'd already messaged my stepmom and said, "Look, it's cash flow, but I need you to help me here," and so she, bless her, she did. And so when I went through it was interesting when I went through because he presented back the history file, which was an A4 folder with pictures in, and his wife was there, and I was talking through some of these stories, and I mentioned earlier about meeting my stepmom when I was like 5 or 6, and his wife got quite emotional about it, and I think that's what cars can do, and you talk to people that find cars in their family history or that means something.
And when you say you were going through the history file, presumably that was your dad's handwriting in there.
Well, interestingly, he was quite disorganised, and I put the whole thing together.
Okay.
He took some of the photo because he was a photographer by trade, so I'd literally produced this. I was probably 18 when I put it together, and literally it was a work of such passion for me to capture that. And I had history, pictures of him racing in the 60s, as I said, picture of him and my stepmother, and subsequent to that, pictures of it in Barbados and in Canada. And in fact, I've got the picture with the last time Dad drove me in the car, unbeknownst to me at the time. And so I realised that all I'd done is put all the pictures in a folder, and I hadn't annotated any of it. So I was bringing the story to life by obviously sharing that history with these two people, and they found it quite emotional. So as a result of that, yes, I bought the car, which was great. I kind of didn't believe it at first. And it got delivered about a week later. And I had my first drive out with my great friend Rob, who you know. And I've got a video of it, literally coming down the high street with me driving. And it's a really weird experience, Paul, to think that was 53 years. I mean, he absolutely doted on the car. And it was part of my life, all my life. In fact, as I said, it touched my mother as well as my stepmother.
But you never thought you'd see that car again?
Honestly, I thought it was, in America, because that was, the chap lived in America. So it went originally a UK car, went to Barbados for 30 years.
Because your father moved to Barbados?
Yeah. And had a really successful career there. Then worked up, and to the point he retired. Then my stepmom's Canadian, so they moved to Canada, 10 years, and he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's while he was up there.
So it's a very well-travelled car.
Yeah, albeit not high mileage, but it's travelled.
now it's come home.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about your father's illness. I mean, tragically, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. It's fascinating that you've not only reacquired the family car, but you're actually using it as a way of raising awareness and funds as well for the Alzheimer's Society. Do you want to talk about how that's come about?
Yeah, I mean, so many of your listeners probably, and indeed you, we've all got, sadly, family stories or friend stories of this terrible disease. I was driving back from seeing the car and offering to buy it, and the phone rang, and it was the Alzheimer's Society, and they said, "Look, really grateful you've signed up to do a memory walk," which, there's many charities that do memory walks, or
Sure.
indeed cancer, and as I say, many charities use that. So the chap on the end of the phone said, "Any questions?" So I said, No. I said, "But I'd have to go a long way to beat the amount of money I raised last year for the charity." And I'd restored and sold a Mark III transit van, which was an ex-HMRC surveillance van, nicknamed the Spy Van. So we raised 13 grand, I think it was, for Alzheimer's the year before. And
Fantastic.
he was really interested, and he was said, "Oh, that's amazing, well done, thank you for your support." And I put the phone down, and I thought, I kind of know what I need to do with this car. It just came to me literally as kind of a flash, and so therefore because of my father, I now have a career in the motor industry. I'm passionate about cars, and I wanted to almost mark that memory and mark what he'd given me. So I decided at that time, I mean, I will run the car. It didn't need a lot of work. It was very, very untouched almost from when Dad had it. So actually it was great to just get back in the car and feel that emotion of,
Sure.
The smells, the sound, and it just reminded me of my dad every time I drive it now.
Of course, yeah.
So effectively what I'm going to do, once I can no longer drive, which effectively is my choice to either sell it or hopefully I'll be around to see it otherwise, but I have gifted it in my will to Alzheimer's, so God forbid I fall over tomorrow. Your listeners will know that car will be donated. Well, it'll be sold in auction, and all the money donated to Alzheimer's, every penny.
That was amazing. I mean, what an incredible thing to do, James. And I'm sure we're all full of admiration to you for that. It's an emotional story, but these classic cars, they get under our skin, don't they? Particularly when there's a family involvement such as yours. Absolutely.
And it was interesting, and I don't know whether I'm going to say it, but my stepmom, when she was in tears when she told me what she'd done, but she'd actually she sold a holiday cottage they had in Canada, which was stunning, which her father had built in the 40s. So it was a very emotional journey, and she looked after my dad right until the end. I mean, it's a horrendous disease, more so actually ultimately for the carers and the family members. But I will always admire what she did for that. So, but when she said to me she sold the car, she said, "Well, it doesn't matter, because when I've gone, you'll be able to buy another one." And of course, probably everyone's sitting there now listening to this going, no, there's only one.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think if I'd have found it, Paul, and it had been restored back to factory condition, I wouldn't have wanted it, if that makes sense.
No, I can relate to what you're saying. I mean, you mentioned when you first sat in it after buying it, and the smells and the sound. Those memories flood back then, don't they?
Yeah, and he modified the car a lot over the 50-odd years. His reasoning for that was he drove it and he knew where modifications fitted. So,
sure, yeah.
So he
he raced it as well, didn't he?
Well, he raced it, yeah. So he fitted. It was quite popular at the time to fit a conversion for a Ford Sierra gearbox. So it went to a 5-speed with full synchro on all the gears. Well, full synchro on first. But he also put telescopic dampers, de-seamed the body. So it really, it's not a purist car. But for me, it's absolutely as I remember it, and Dad loving it.
But it's also the spec that your dad created.
Yeah, exactly.
And you could never put it back to factory spec because of that, could you? It's a tribute to him that it's in the same spec that it was when he enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think for me, the one thing I would just add is over in North America generally, obviously British cars, as they were popular, there aren't really many of them surviving over in North America. But having brought the car back to England, I think this is the great thing. Dad would absolutely love what's happening with the car now, because I've met I've met many people now that race twin cams on the, Goodwood and Silverstone, and to take the car the first time back to Silverstone after 40 odd years, it was just, talking about it gives me goosebumps and the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, because I just think of the times that he was in that car, what he thought, what he experienced, and that, to your point, you can't write that, you can't buy it unless you've experienced it.
Exactly. So really, the last 18 months of owning the car yourself, it's been quite life-changing in many ways.
Yeah, it has, and I think the Alzheimer's piece, I've become an ambassador for the Alzheimer's Society, so I go and talk and speak at some of their events, and we've raised a significant amount of money, and that's literally taking the car to car shows. It's been at the NEC for the Resto show and the show later on in November.
And we should mention as well that you've actually set up your own group, haven't you, which is on social media and called MG Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's not a very inventive name, I suppose, but if you type MG Alzheimer's as one word in, it's got a Facebook page, as everything does now. It's on Instagram, Twitter, and actually, if you put the 3 W's in front, I've just actually finished uploading and actually adding all the images, because one thing for me, as I said, was really key, is that whoever ends up with this car eventually, it was really important to me that they have that history digitally, so it will never be lost.
Yeah, absolutely. So if any of our listeners want to follow your progress with the car, they can find MG Alzheimer's on social media. And presumably throughout the summer, you'll be out and about in it and posting regular updates and photographs and telling us all what you're up to in it.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, we're looking forward to that. And seriously, it's an amazing story. It's one we can all relate to, I'm sure. But James, before we go, we always end up with we always ask our guests one or two fairly random questions at the end, if you don't mind. So you mentioned earlier on that you'd owned a Daimler Super V8. So that's was that the X300 generation? What year was that one?
So that was a 98 on R.
So that was,
it was the first of the kind of Ford re-engineered 308, I think
with
it was.
308 with a V8 engine, wasn't it?
Yeah, twin supercharged.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a car.
So, okay, was that one of your ultimate cars, or looking at your back catalogue of classics that you've owned, and it's quite extensive, does that come near the top?
Do you know, from my position, I've never owned that shape of a Jaguar. I know this was a Daimler, but I love that car. It was a great car. Very, very swift. I think my favourite car, but actually my friends know it was probably my nightmare car. I bought a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow 2.
Really? And
I know you mentioned on the first podcast about your favourite in terms of in terms of celebrating anniversaries of cars, and you talked about its successor. But this car, it was bought in auction. I found it in auction, and you can write off to the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club and ask for history. And I got the full history file back, which is kind of the build records, but it also had a lot of original factory paperwork, as in correspondence.
Okay.
And it turned out, I saw the car, it had a bracket on the wing. The service history was London, it had been re-registered, so I figured it had been an embassy car. But the history that came back from the club showed it was the Iraqi ambassador's car.
Really?
From new. And it had the order form, it had the original diplomatic plate that was on the car.
Wow.
So I had a ball with that. I mean, that was great to take to shows. And I had a flag and a flag. The bracket was a flag mast. So I had a flag reproduced and I had a lot of laughs in that.
I can imagine.
But I have to say, anybody I bought that car so reasonably, and they always say you should spend the most amount of money you can possibly afford to buy what you want. I spent a fortune on that car.
It was a bit of a money pit, was it?
It was a total money pit. But it was, I tell you what, again, coming back to the emotions of cars, that was probably... I do look back with shivers, but only because of the financial side of it. But the smiles per mile were fabulous.
Absolutely. And such presence from that car as well. Anyway, I think let's just remind our listeners, if you want to find out more about James's exploits with his MGA twin cam, check out his social media outlets. Just look for MG Alzheimer's, and we'll be following his progress throughout the summer. And James, thanks again for your time, and enjoy your exploits with the much-loved MG. And thanks for speaking to us.
Thanks, Paul. And I'll just add quickly before I go, my friends and I, we've listened to the podcast so far. Richard and you deserve absolute congratulations for what you're doing. It's great what you're doing. Absolutely just sharing that fact and making sure everyone tunes in on a weekly basis. But seriously, it's been great. Thank you.
That really means a lot. Thank you so much, James.